Hi, I'm Manny Vacchiano with BiopharmIQ, and today I want to talk to you about Biopharma catalyst events. We have a lot of information about these events on our website, bpiq.com, because they're so important for micro, small, and mid-cap biopharma companies. So what are they? Well, in general, they're events that have the potential to significantly impact the stock price of a biopharma company. The most prevalent of these events, and typically the most important, are clinical trial report outs. And these include, in the late stages, regulatory decisions. And I'll talk about these in more detail in a few minutes. But there are other catalyst events as well for many of these companies. These can include revenue report outs. They can include corporate events or corporate updates, as well as litigation or legal updates. Let's start by talking about the most important, the most prevalent of the catalyst events, which are clinical trial report outs. In a prototypical clinical trial, we start with a phase 1, which is primarily a safety phase, and if things go well and look safe, then the asset typically moves into phase 2, which has typically much more efficacy data. And if that data looks good enough, and sometimes there's dosing data as well, then that asset moves into a phase 3, which typically is a much larger trial, which includes top-line primary endpoint and secondary endpoints, which are efficacy endpoints. And if the asset achieves these endpoints, then the company sponsor files for approval by filing an NDA if it's a small molecule oral medication, or a BLA if it's a biologic, such as an antibody or a cell therapy. And then there's a regulatory deadline by which the regulatory agency reaches a decision of whether or not to approve the drug based on the performance of these clinical trials, as well as some quality and manufacturing data. In the US, we call that final deadline date the PDUFA date. But this process and these events are not only relevant for the US FDA, they're relevant for filings in the MAA in Europe or the Chinese FDA, or even sometimes the regulatory agency in Japan can be large enough to be catalyst events. Now, during the trial, during the phases, there are a number of report outs that occur. Some of these include, for example, the initiation of the trial. There are various updates during the trial that occur as well. Some of those are Data Safety Monitoring Board or DSMB go, no-go decisions. Others can be interim report outs with data, for example, at a biomedical meeting. And then finally, for the different phases, especially phase 2, phase 3, we have top-line data, which is almost always super important and can be a stock driver event for these companies. If an asset moves through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, the data looks good enough, and there's a filing of an NDA or a BLA, then we've got other regulatory decisions that happen after that time. The acceptance of the filing package for review. If the safety and efficacy data have some questions, there can be this AdCom or sort of let's call it an advisory panel meeting. And then finally, there is the final approval or no approval decision. So there are a lot of events that occur during a clinical trial that can drive the stock price of these companies, and that are catalyst events. And these are the most prevalent and typically the most important catalyst events for these companies, and they occur over a period of years. On the next slide, I just provide one example. This is a company called Arenia, and if we look at Arenia, for some years its stock price hovered at between, let's say, $5 and $8, and it was working its way through clinical trials. And for a lupus asset, it reported out positive phase 3 results late in 2019, and that really uplifted the stock several 100%. And then the stock came down some, took quite a hit upon the COVID issue in March of last year, bounced back, and then earlier this year, there was a final decision before the PDUFA date or on the PDUFA date, an approval decision which increased the stock price, which was a catalyst event for this stock, somewhere around 25%. So this is just one example, and that's the way these micro, small, and mid-cap biopharma companies move in their stock price as they move through clinical trials, hopefully, as this shows for Arenia, through a successful clinical trial like Arenia's lupus asset. In addition to clinical trial report outs, there are additional catalyst events. For some companies, there are revenue report outs, quarterly revenue report outs, which can be important. For example, some companies, some of these small mid-cap biopharma companies have approved assets. So on a quarterly basis, they're reporting out revenue for these assets. And if their revenue is above or below, significantly above or below market expectations, it can be a driver for the stock price. So although all of these companies pretty much have clinical assets, they're in clinical development, some of them also have approved assets that can be catalyst events for the companies. Furthermore, there are corporate events that occur for these companies. For example, maybe they signed an important collaboration agreement with Big Pharma, or maybe a commercialization agreement with a large company. Now, these corporate events can be validating to the technology or the base technology or an asset for a smaller mid-cap biopharma company. They can be catalyst events. There are also funding announcements. Keep in mind that these companies are bringing assets through clinical trials, super expensive, and most of them are losing money, many times tens of millions of dollars a quarter. So they need to raise money and follow-on offerings. And so there are funding announcements, follow-on offering announcements that occur over time as well. And these sometimes can be downward moves on the stock because they are diluting events. And then occasionally, C-suite announcements can move the stock. For example, if there's a highly respected CEO that joins a small biopharma company, sometimes that can move the stock as well. Then the last type of catalyst event I want to talk about today are legal events. And for these companies, these biopharma companies, these are typically patent litigation report outs. So sometimes a major asset for one of these companies is in a patent litigation, and if there's a district court decision or an appellate court ruling, these can also be driver events, catalyst events for the companies. So we have all of these events, clinical trial readouts, corporate events, quarterly report outs, litigation updates sometimes. How do you keep track of all of these? Well, at BiopharmIQ and our website, bpiq.com, our goal is to help you more easily keep track of the critical events for companies that you follow, or even to find events that you'd like to invest in. One of the most exciting things about investing in biopharma companies are these catalyst events. And the fact that their timing is fairly predictable, at least we know usually within about a month or so when they're going to occur. And many times we also know if they're going to be what are called big mover events that might move the stock by 25% up or down. So it's really exciting. And at bpiq.com, we have our calendar of upcoming catalyst events. Our database is searchable, it's filterable. It's really a powerful tool that you can use to help identify events, identify companies you want to follow, or for the companies you do follow to more easily follow their events. So our goal is really to provide you information and resources to help you make better investment decisions for these biopharma companies. So I hope you get as jazzed up as I do about investing in biopharma companies, and I hope you'll use our tools and information on bpiq.com to help you make better decisions. Now, this is one of a series of educational videos, so feel free to take a look at the others as well, and we hope that you'll find them very useful.